This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, a jump in U.S. Treasury yields and a firmer dollar kept emerging markets in check today. MSCI's index of emerging market stocks slipping 0.1% on the day, and that's ahead of a U.S. Fed meeting as investors hope for confirmation that policymakers have no appetite to hike rates just yet. Now, South Africa's JSE was little changed on the back of this. In Nigeria, the all-share posted losses as predicted. Stocks halted a seven-session streak of gains on Tuesday, as of course negative sentiments towards banking stocks weighed on the benchmark index. Now, also coming up on today's show, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says ANC should have done more to prevent the Zuma-era corruption. We take a look at Joe Biden's time in office as he nears the first 100 days as the U.S. president. And Tunisia reaches for the stars with its first locally made satellite. Well, let's start off in South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa says the governing party under the country's former president, Jacob Zuma, could and should have done more to prevent corruption. He made these remarks in a highly anticipated testimony to a graft inquiry. Now, Zuma's former deputy, President Ramaphosa, gave evidence on recent allegations of wrongdoing by members of his own party. The state capture inquiry is probing allegations of graft during Jacob Zuma's 9 years in office. This includes allegations that Zuma allowed businessmen close to him, brothers Atul Ajay and Rajesh Gupta, to influence a policy and win lucrative government contracts.
We must acknowledge that the issue of state capture was a matter of great political contestation within the ANC. Differences over whether indeed state capture existed, its extent and form, and what should be done about it contributed to divisions within the National Executive Committee and other ANC structures. It is worth mentioning that one of the earliest claims made within ANC structures of the possibility that members of the Gupta family may have had an improper role in the functioning of the executive.
And still in South Africa, the Reserve Bank may hold off on interest rate hikes this year if inflation remains at lower levels. In 2020, the Reserve Bank cut rates by a record 300 basis points in order to limit the impacts of COVID-19. Now, the bank wants to remain accommodative to the South African economy for as long as it can. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with the details.
It's almost a year since the Reserve Bank last cut rates. In May last year, the MPC agreed to reduce the repo rate by 25 basis points, taking it to a historical low of 3.5%. The prime lending rate for consumers has remained at 7% since.
Today, when we look back, we can say with pride that the framework had served South Africa well. There is nothing virtuous in having a high inflation rate. Higher inflation begets higher interest rates. And the reason why we are having historically low interest rates today is precisely because we have got historically low inflation.
The Reserve Bank has often been praised for its effective inflation targeting, but there's also been a few critics that disagree with the bank's cautious conservative approach. Some economists believe there's still room to cut rates further. But the SARB is worried about price pressures filtering through.
Of course, the Reserve Bank is indeed a concern, especially when we look at the uptick that is anticipated from electricity prices and administered taxes broadly, such as the uptick that we're also seeing from an oil price at the level of the currency, which is expected to have some pass-through effects to the consumer price inflation number going forward, which for this year, I think based on their own estimates, they anticipated to be at around around 4.2% in 2021.
Speaking to Bloomberg recently, the governor suggested that rates could remain at these levels.
The Reserve Bank's quarterly projection model showed 2 interest rate hikes for this year. But the bank is suggesting that if inflation remains under control at these lower levels, it could keep rates on hold for longer.
In my own estimations, I do anticipate that the repo rates would certainly remain unchanged for the better part of this year. I do anticipate in the beginning of next year, the 25 basis point rate hike to really moderate the inflation situation.
As it stands, the rate cutting cycle is over. The next move will be up. In the meantime, rates on hold will provide some relief to consumers to shore up debt. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's turn to aviation now. And the South African low-cost carrier Mango has suffered another setback on Wednesday. The Airports Company of South Africa suspended the airline from using its airports due to debt. SCSA operates 9 of South Africa's airports. Mango has been in discussions with the airports company, but ACSA's announcement today left passengers stranded in various airports across the country. Some customers were waiting to board flights this morning when they were told about the suspension.
So we're here out on business. I'm an attorney and we obviously have a flight booked for today, but it's cancelled.
We've been waiting here for Mango to come and address us of what's happening, why we're not flying. Are we getting refunded or not? They are saying nothing, absolutely nothing. No one is coming to us and address us. We're just sitting here stuck. They've been just telling us through the echo that they are sorry for the inconvenience. Nothing is done. We don't have any SMSs about our refunds or what to do next.
We haven't received any confirmation or any information. The only thing we got is SMSs. No one has come out, nobody has spoken, it's just dead silence.
Now, by this afternoon, Mango Airline did make a payment, which did help to settle a portion of its debt. ACSA has agreed to allow the airline back onto the runway on Thursday. But it might only be for a few days. Mango has been in financial distress since COVID-19 hit last year. The low-cost carrier, which is 100% owned by South African Airways, might be forced to suspend its operations in May unless the government funding it was promised comes through. Well, let's head to Egypt now, where the government has approved a $2.3 billion loan agreement to finance the construction of 2 monorail lines. Built by Egypt's National Authority for Tunnels, the project will be the first of its kind in North Africa and will be the longest monorail system in the world upon completion. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim reporting from Cairo.
The loan is to finance part of the project for 2 monorail lines at 6th of October City, west of Cairo, and the new administrative capital. The total cost is 2.4 billion euros.
The monorail will be connecting the new cities and the administrative capital to Cairo and the old cities through a web linking different forms of transportation, like intercity trains with underground metros, electric train, and monorail. The monorail will predominantly benefit employees and workers in the new cities, including the administrative capital.
The monorail is expected to transport 350,000 passengers a day. Canada's Bombardier is building the carriages, the rail, and providing maintenance. Local companies are currently preparing the infrastructure.
The monorail is considered an important means to reduce traffic congestion and will operate through an electric pilot. The expenses for constructing and maintaining it is lower than the other forms of railways, like trains and the underground. It's environmentally friendly as well.
The 1.88 billion euro loan is a soft one to be paid over 14 years, and the project should be ready by mid-2022. The monorail is just one segment of a mega national project to upgrade the railway system, which includes adopting new trains, electric trains, and trams as well. The government is developing the rundown sector that has suffered from negligence for decades and has witnessed scores of accidents over the years. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, like several other African nations, the International Monetary Fund is warning that Ghana faces a debt crunch as the country's spending keeps exceeding its revenue generation. The IMF has estimated a fiscal deficit of 12.6% for the West African country this year. That's above the government's projected 10.8%. Analysts are concerned that Ghana may find it difficult to secure loans from the international debt market in the future in order to support its economy. Here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reporting from Accra.
Ghana recently raised a $3 billion loan from the international debt market to support its budget spending for this year. The government plans to raise a total $5 billion. The country's debt is now 76.1% of GDP, above the World Bank's accepted debt sustainability threshold of 70%. Analysts say it will be difficult for Ghana to continue securing loans if that trend continues.
Government will be incapacitated to be able to fund infrastructure projects, be it the healthcare or education or road networks. Remember the roads that the government is involved in. If your budget deficit is rising, it means that you do not have the ability to fund some of these productive activities.
Economists say more than half of the revenue generated in the country this year will be used to pay back interest on loans. Credit ratings agency Moody's says Ghana will find it expensive to borrow to run its economy because of a decline in revenue and increasing interest payments.
As it stands now, it's not even wise for government to do domestic borrowing because you need to ease up, you need to allow businesses to have access to credit here, because the moment government borrows domestically, right, what it does is that it's competing with businesses.
Analysts want the government to rein in spending and find cheaper loans to fund its budget deficit. That may prove difficult because the government still has to spend on its vaccination rollout and other interventions to support economic growth. And as the global economy recovers from the shocks caused by the pandemic, the cost of borrowing on international debt markets could rise. It is also looking for other ways of widening the tax net in order to bridge the budget deficit. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And here's a quick look at other top headlines today. Kenya Power has invited local and international banks to offer it new, cheaper loans that will be used to retire some of its $510 million worth of commercial debt. Now, the move is part of the electricity distributor's efforts to boost its liquidity position amid mounting supplier debt and losses. Interested financiers have up to May 17th to submit their documents. And Safaricom PLC's chances of winning one of two Ethiopian telecoms operating licenses got a boost. That is after it emerged as one of the only two bidders to participate in the auction that closed on Monday. The Ethiopian Communications Authority announced that it did receive a bid from a consortium that includes Safaricom and another from MTN International Mauritius, which is a subsidiary of South Africa's MTN Group. 9 other firms that had expressed interest in the auction dropped out at the last stage. Meanwhile, the family of Samsung Electronics chairman Lee Kun-hee will pay more than $10.78 billion in inheritance taxes on his estate. South Korea has one of the world's highest inheritance tax rates. Mr. Lee, who is credited with transforming Samsung into a global electronics giant, died in October last year. Now, the tax issue has been closely watched by investors as it could have affected the Lee family's stake in Samsung. And German lender Deutsche Bank beat forecasts for the first quarter, posting a net profit of $1.1 billion. That's around 50% better than analysts predicted. The gains were driven by strong business in the investment banking division. That was Deutsche Bank's best quarter since 2014. Revenue from bond and currency sales and trading leapt about 34%, beating U.S. rivals including Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now, still coming up on the show. We'll take a look at COVID-induced job losses across Africa. And South Sudan invests in the agricultural sector across the country.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's head to South Sudan now, where the government says it is planning to distribute farming materials to help promote agriculture across the country. Now, the plan comes as the United Nations warns that more than half of the country's population faces acute food shortages. CGTN's Patrick Oyet with the details.
Relentless rains last year led to flooding in most parts of South Sudan. Lots of livestock and crops were washed away. 6 years of civil conflict have also disrupted agriculture, and the United Nations says there has been an increase in cattle raiding, which resulted in loss of more livestock. Now, South Sudan's government says it wants to support agriculture by providing farm inputs such as chemicals, seeds, fertilizer and equipment. The long years of civil war left many here injured and unable to carry out work that requires physical strength.
Some people actually are not able to access food, not because of their own fault. They may be disabled. They may be actually people who do not have the means to cultivate or to cultivate enough.
The Agriculture Ministry says it will seek the funds to provide the farm inputs from the World Bank. Most farmers in South Sudan practice subsistence farming, where they use traditional farm tools, grow what is enough only to feed the family for a shorter duration of time, and they depend on natural factors such as rains. The United Nations says about 1.6 million South Sudanese people are internally displaced and depending on food aid. It is urging the government to do more in order to promote agriculture in the country.
We're asking for the government to support those areas by providing those communities with more land so that they can grow more food for themselves, whether they are refugees that South Sudan is kindly hosting in this country, or whether they are displaced South Sudanese who cannot yet go home to their own land.
The Ministry of Agriculture says it plans to distribute seeds, fertilizers and tractors to farmers. However, the UN warns that without durable peace across the country, no amount of equipment or materials given to farmers will resolve the country's food crisis. Patrick Koyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Now, Nigeria is seeking to tap into the digital economy as part of government-led efforts to diversify away from crude oil. As the biggest economy in Africa with one of the largest youth populations in the world, experts say Nigeria is well positioned to develop a strong digital economy. Well, CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has more on that report from Abuja.
Software engineer Tomi Ayoride quit his job 5 years ago to start a flexible financial distribution service network. Tomi saw the gap in Nigeria's banking system, where 56% of the nation's 99.6 million adults are unbanked. So he sought to bring banking closer to the people. An ordinary citizen walks between 2 to as far as 6 kilometers to access the closest bank branch or ATM machine. And it's even further in rural areas. Tomi has managed to sign up to 10,000 merchants across the country on his network, providing seamless financial services in communities.
We turn small merchants in every community to what you call mini bank branches. What we give them are just two things: a mobile app and a POS device. And with those two things, they serve as the entry and exit point from cash to digital. People have accepted this, people have embraced this. They found it more valuable, right, than just using the traditional banking system.
Tomi's business is fast gaining traction. Together with his team, they process an average $25 million monthly, and they've recorded over 200% growth in the last year. Figures from the International Finance Corporation show that the global digital economy is worth over $11.6 trillion. Nigeria is capturing only a fraction of the trade, despite having one of the largest youth population in the world.
We're also seeing a growth also in financial technologies. Now that has been incredible, because as a result of that growth, we have companies like Paystack, we have Flutterwave, and so on. And they are also building world-class organizations on the back of this explosion. So Nigeria has been creating its own share of the global digital economy.
Experts say the West African nation has what it takes to build a solid digital economy.
Imagine what will happen if we get our infrastructure right, if we get our policy environment right. For example, instead of fearing cryptocurrencies, as our central bank appears to be a little averse towards it, what about taxation? What about ensuring, like the US has done, that you treat it as an asset, and when you have capital gains, you also pay?
Experts say the key to unlocking Nigeria's digital economy remains in the hands of the government, which needs to create policies that can accelerate growth in the industry. Failure to exploit this potential could result in a lost revenue opportunity for Africa's leading economy. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's move on now. Here on CGTN, we continue to look at how the coronavirus pandemic impacted various sectors across Africa since the first case was reported a little over a year ago. Well, tonight we focus on how the pandemic led to massive job losses, as well as how African nations are bouncing back. Now, in Uganda, the announcement of the country's first COVID-19 case on March 18th last year led to border closures, curfews, and eventually a countrywide lockdown. The restrictions affected the ability of people to earn a living and paralyzed businesses nationwide. But as the country begins to roll out COVID-19 vaccines, the economy is slowly getting back on its feet. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with more.
This was March 2020. Uganda's capital Kampala turned into a ghost town. Schools, churches and businesses closed, and people were locked up at home for 4 months.
COVID-19 affected us as women in the market. First of all, the total lockdown really affected us because we were locked at our homes. We could not move from home to the places of work. All the capital that we had, the small capital we had, was eaten up.
Almost 12 months into the pandemic, the government has eased restrictions on the movement of people, goods and services, and allowed some businesses to operate. This is Kampala today. The streets, as you can see, are bustling with activity. Many shops have opened for trade, but business has not picked up as expected. According to the Bank of Uganda, trade, construction, and the services sector took the biggest hit during the pandemic. The pace at which the economy is growing is uneven as restrictions continue to weigh heavily on certain activities like tourism.
The sustenance of the cultural arts has been depending purely on what we get from the guests, 80% of who were foreigners. Now, the closing of the airport and all the borders meant that these people no longer come. The closing of the shows have killed all, and I mean all, the revenue.
The latest figures show the economy contracted by 2.2% in the first quarter of financial year 2020-2021 compared to 8.7% in the same period the previous year. But as the country begins to roll out COVID-19 vaccines, the government is looking to sectors like agriculture and tourism to kickstart the economy.
A successful and a faster rollout of the mass vaccination globally could allow a quicker unwinding of social distancing measures and result in more robust increase in economic activity.
The pandemic has forced businesses to become more creative and innovative, according to the World Bank.
We had a lot of engagement online, so we grew our digital presence so that we would continue to engage our clients while we were at home. And as you know, everybody was home, but they were spending a lot of time on their phones.
But for many businesses, their survival remains at great risk, and the government is using monetary policy to support businesses to get loans at lower interest rates in order to keep them afloat. The hope is that as vaccines become readily available and the spread of COVID-19 is contained, the economy is expected to rebound. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, let's go to Egypt now, where CGTN's Yasser Hakim examines the effect of the coronavirus pandemic on the country's job market.
Egypt was the first country in Africa to report the outbreak of the coronavirus disease last year. The fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic hit the North African economy hard from March 2020, as measures imposed to curb the spread of the virus forced companies to halt production, taking a huge toll on the labor market.
All my clients were affected in the supply field and in the manufacturing sector. They had to lay off jobs. Restaurants and cafes had to cut working hours because of the curfew. Working shifts were cut by half. So many lost their jobs.
Egypt's employment rate jumped more than 9% in the second half of 2020, the highest since 2012, as the virus ravaged the global economy. The most affected sectors were the tourism, hospitality, and travel industries, which recorded a slump in activity, in addition to the real estate and manufacturing sectors. The state quickly intervened to prevent more job casualties.
The state, through the central bank, released a set of fiscal aid packages to companies, especially the hardest hit sectors like tourism. They were given loans with zero interest and long repayment plans so that they could pay wages and stay afloat. In return, companies and institutions were prohibited from firing any workers, and those who did were harshly punished.
As COVID-19 cases started to decline following the outbreak of the first wave of the pandemic, the government gradually lifted the curfew in July 2020 to avoid an economic shutdown and to allow production and businesses to resume operations. Egypt's government also launched several major projects to kickstart its economic recovery.
The national mega projects have been the savior in this turbulent time. We are talking about constructing 21 new cities and developing the old cities as well. There are infrastructure projects, building roads, upgrading transport, electricity, water stations, and different industries. They all need massive number of laborers with different skills from around the country. This has created huge job opportunities.
By the end of 2020, unemployment rates dropped down to pre-COVID levels of 7% as the measures began to bear fruit. With the rollout of the vaccines and acceleration of inoculations across the globe, there is optimism of a revival of the North African state's economy in the second half of the year. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, in South Africa, the liquor industry is one of these sectors seeking to claw back losses from COVID-19 restrictions. The industry is counting mounting losses caused by production stoppages and, of course, several sales bans over the past 12 months. Added to that is a cutback in consumer spending and, of course, higher taxes in the country. CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
South Africa's liquor industry has been battered over the past 12 months. Alcohol sales were banned 3 times to keep trauma units clear from COVID-19 patients, resulting in sale losses of $2.5 billion and a $200 million tax decline.
At lockdown level 5, we had to stop. Everything stopped. We couldn't produce, we couldn't export. We lost 19 weeks of potential sales. That's excluding some of the other limitations in terms of limited days for what we call off-trade, the box to store and home consumption purchase. Volumes overall, they declined around about 20%, which translates to about 1.1 billion litres that we couldn't sell.
7,000 jobs were lost as a direct result of stringent lockdown measures, with more expected as a third wave looms.
We estimate the overall value chain supports 1 million jobs, and based on that, it's about 200,000 jobs that are at risk. So we use the words at risk because businesses respond differently. Some businesses have gone as far as retrenching, like say Heineken in the manufacturing side, and others take other decisions to kind of contain the cost, maybe don't fill post and cut salaries and all of those.
A return to level 1 will allow producers and retailers to claw back some losses, but the devastation spreads far across the value chain, affecting pubs, restaurants and hotels.
There's no doubt that I think the industry, whether it be retailers, whether it be bar and restaurant owners, and even I think the suppliers of various dry goods, raw materials in this industry, I think it's still going to be, or it has been, a very tough 10 months. I can't say that I think the retail environment is going to improve significantly in the next 6 months.
Subdued consumer spending and increased taxes is likely to hamper recovery further.
The most disappointing thing in terms of our recovery plans was the excise tax increase that we got from the finance minister. We would have hoped that he considered all the losses and then probably apply just an inflation-only adjustment, which should have been around about 4.2%. Unfortunately, he gave us 8% across the board, which then affects a number of businesses on their path to recovery.
South Africa's infection rate has dropped dramatically, prompting it to move to level 1. Alcohol sale is freely available and permitted, but a third wave could change the situation without warning. The question now is whether the industry can survive another ban. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Of course, you're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now, but still coming up on the show. We'll take a look at Joe Biden's time in office as he nears his first 100 days as U.S. president. And Indian stocks take a hit from stricter lockdown restrictions.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
And now to some international news. U.S. President Joe Biden is concluding his first 100 days in office this week. Now, during this period, Biden devoted much of his focus in passing the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill to cushion the country from the economic effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Through the stimulus plan, the U.S. economy is projected to grow by up to 7%, which is the fastest growth rate since 1984. Well, let's take it all apart with John Terrett. He joins us now in New York. John, great to have you with us today. Now, of course, Biden had a massive job taming the COVID-19 pandemic, considering, of course, that the U.S. led the world in the number of cases and deaths. How effective has his administration been in reining in those numbers so far?
Yeah, 100 days. Amazing where the time goes, isn't it? You have to remember, Uche, that Biden was elected on the promise of making COVID-19 his #1 domestic priority. And I think it's true that he certainly has done that. I think, generally speaking, the COVID numbers have been going down during his time in office, certainly since the inauguration itself in the middle of January. And it's true to say that there have been some hot spots around the country, and I guess there probably still are. But my sense of it really is that he benefited from the flowing of the vaccines. We have 3 of them flowing here at the moment, and I do also think that we have to tip the hat in the direction of the Trump administration, who got them going so that Joe Biden could benefit from that. My sense of it here, and I'm in New York right now, I'm looking out windows that you can't see onto a lovely sunny day. My sense of it is that there's a real sense of opening up in America now. Certainly here in New York, we have more people in the city than we've had for the best part of a year. There are tourists here again, though not from overseas like where you are, but they're domestic tourists. But nonetheless, the feeling is that things are starting to come back. And oddly enough, I think the emphasis for Biden now regarding COVID moves towards India and potentially even Africa, because we've seen this tragic horror story playing out in India. Biden's been under pressure to do something to help. He's promised to send cash. He's promised to change the import and export rules a little bit, to send equipment that actually makes oxygen for India. And also there's the vaccines. I say we have 3 of them, Pfizer, Moderna and J&J back online now. But America also has a huge stockpile of AstraZeneca vaccine, which is not approved for emergency use here, but there's a huge stockpile here, and I think that he's going to send some of that to India. And my point of this is that I think you can read for India any African country that may be in a similar situation at any point in the future. Uche?
Quite right. Now, of course, many Americans and the rest of the world were also looking to see how he'll reverse some of those controversial Trump-era policies on issues such as immigration, the economy. We've got that corporate tax, and of course, climate change. How much progress has he made on these issues?
Well, that's a good question. Progress, I'm not so sure, but I will tell you this. He's certainly way less bipartisan than we thought he was going to be. He was very bipartisan in the Senate, and he's kind of come out fighting as a progressive ever since he was inaugurated in the middle of January. Let me list the things that you mentioned to me. Immigration. Well, he stopped the building of the wall, and he's deputized Kamala Harris, who is the vice president, to be the guru when it comes to trying to sort out the issue on the southern border. Though many people here criticize her for not having visited the southern border, even though she has the job. On the economy, we'll see more of this tonight in the joint address that's coming up in the House of Representatives, normally the State of the Union, a joint session tonight because he's so new. We've seen him basically try to move things in favor of the economy being more fair for working people, ending the trickle-down economics of Reagan and Thatcher, which we've lived with since the 1980s. So tonight, progressive policies, police reform, we've got immigration, we've got gun safety, COVID-19, of course, but the White House says that the focus of it all is going to be children, families, schools, and community colleges. Big bill coming up potentially on those issues to put lots of money in the pockets of lower to middle income people. And as for climate change, well, we know the Green New Deal is on the table, nothing on that yet, but it'll be a struggle to get through the House and the Senate. Uche?
Now, on the international front, when Biden took office, we saw quite strong messaging that we'll see a clear break from his predecessor's somewhat aggressive stance towards a foreign policy. What moves has he made to repair relations with the U.S. allies? And have we seen a major pivot on China and the trade issue or Africa relations going forward?
Well, I mean, no and yes, all in the same breath, really. I mean, he's been even more aggressive in many ways than President Trump was. It's an extraordinary thing. I mean, let's take Russia, for example. He's imposed sanctions. There's been a spat of diplomatic expulsions. All of this over the solar winds hack, which happened during the presidential election, which the White House blames the Russians for. It may be that he'll meet with President Putin at the NATO summit on June the 14th, but relationships are always very touchy between both sides. And I guess they'll try and sort things out if they can meet face to face. On China, no movement on the Chinese companies that have been delisted at the New York Stock Exchange. There are many Chinese corporations that Americans simply can't do business with anymore. There's the Strategic Competition Act, which is in the Senate at the moment. This might actually benefit African countries a little bit because the Strategic Competition Act, its aim is to try and hobble China's expansion plans. And, you know, it's not that Biden doesn't understand why China would want to expand around the world via Belt and Road and other initiatives. But what he's saying is, not on my watch, mate. You know, you're not going to be the biggest economy in the world by 2028 if I could possibly help it. And what he means by that is they want to meet China at its own game. So there could be money coming for all sorts of projects in all sorts of African countries because of the Strategic Competition Act. And I would put it this way. Trump used to talk about all the time at rallies and things, America first, America first. Well, you know, I think Joe Biden doesn't say it, but that's his policy too, but more quietly. Uche?
Well, many thanks for your insights there, John. We do have to leave it there. That, of course, is John Terrett joining us in New York. Well, let's turn our attention now to India. A return of the lockdown-like restrictions on movement of people and business operation poses a threat to India's economy. It has triggered huge foreign capital outflows from the country's stock market, and a halt in business activities. Take a look.
India's stock market is set for the largest monthly foreign capital outflows in over a year as the deadly wave of coronavirus cases crippled the nation's health system, putting business recoveries in doubt. Bloomberg data shows that overseas investors have sold $1.1 billion worth of Indian stocks through April 23rd, the biggest outflow since March last year. Many market observers cited a report from Japanese brokerage Nomura. As of April 25th, the Nomura India Business Resumption Index registered its steepest weekly fall in over a year of 8.5 percentage points to 75.9, which is 24 percentage points below pre-pandemic levels.
We've seen lockdowns or stringent restrictions across few states. But cases do remain high in some of the more populated states, so we do expect more restrictions to come through. So this is definitely going to impact activity in April and also in May.
Goldman Sachs lowered India's growth forecast for the quarter. It cited lower consumption and services activities likely due to increased social restrictions. Analysts say it's still hard to predict how much the pandemic in India would impact the world economy.
But the path is uneven, but the policy at work certainly will help. And to some extent, having the COVID spread under control will be critical from a medium to long-term perspective. So there's certainly uncertainties which are picking up, but I am not bearish on the global recovery story here.
In terms of future outlooks, Nomura says as the pace of vaccination picks up, it expects there should be another return of pent-up demand from June. It also predicted some other tailwinds like strong global growth, lagged impact of easy financial conditions, and front-loaded fiscal spending. Song Yangtian, CGTN.
On that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Despite oil climbing slightly, traders say India's COVID-19 crisis and a bigger than expected build in U.S. crude stocks did weigh on the market. However, confidence shown by OPEC and its allies in a solid recovery in global fuel demand did offset this. Meanwhile, firmer U.S. Treasury yields weighed on gold. Also, the dollar index rose 0.1% against its rivals, making gold more expensive for holders of other currencies. Investors were waiting for more policy cues from the U.S. Fed statement expected today. Well, let's take a short break now. Still to come. Tunisia reaches for the stars with its first locally made satellite. And pandemic-related rules boost South Africa's e-commerce sector.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
And Tunisia has celebrated the launch of its first domestically made satellite, which it hopes will inspire young engineers to reach for the stars at home rather than join those emigrating overseas. Now, Challenge 1, which has been built by a team of telecom giant Telnet, successfully blasted off along with 37 other satellites aboard a Russian Soyuz rocket in Kazakhstan. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi with the details.
Challenge 1 will have a transmission capacity of 250 kilobytes per second. It marks the beginning of a future constellation of more than 30 unit satellites that Telnet plans to launch within 3 years in partnership with other African and Arab countries.
Our next goal is to launch a future constellation of satellites for the African continent to offer Internet of Things services. This is the future of technology. We want Tunisia and Africa to keep up with changing technology. Our engineers can make this dream come true.
Tunisian Foreign Minister noted that the state will support its technology startups and engineers.
We're proud of this historic achievement for Tunisia. Satellite was developed here at Telnet and on our soil by local engineers. Many countries around the world have offered their congratulations to the Tunisian government. Tunisia is a country of innovation and creativity.
Anis Youssef is one of the most talented engineers in Tunisia. As head of innovation activities and new products at Telnet Group, he has supervised the design, development, implementation and launch of Challenge 1. Many women have contributed to the success of the first Tunisian satellite mission. Among them is Serine Ouanani, who is a development, test and validation engineer.
This project was made by 100% Tunisian competencies, where all Tunisian engineers who graduated from public engineering universities were proud of this achievement.
Telnet Group says Challenge 1 is designed to transmit data from connected objects. The satellite is equipped with thermometers or pollution sensors, location chips and humidity sensors. The data from these devices will be accessible in real time, even in an area without internet coverage. Its mission will last from 5 to 7 years. According to Telnet Group, the design, development and successful launch of Challenge 1 has lasted more than 3 years of research by young local engineers. The tech company invested $1.2 million in the satellite project. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, South Africa is seeing a record surge in consumer spend on digital services. According to local bank FNB, home delivery services and online shopping have taken off. While video streaming is the fastest growing category amongst its customers, there's been a huge uptake in services such as Netflix, Amazon, Spotify, as of course South Africa's lockdown drags and consumers continue working from home. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
Animal nutritionist Megan Marshall has been working remotely over the last year. Her daily routine has changed completely. Marshall is an avid gamer and also spends a lot of her free time watching series and movies online.
Netflix is a big one. I've also subscribed to monthly gaming packages, so every month I'll get a set of random games. I don't have to choose. And things like YouTube Premium. Before, I used to use free YouTube, but now because you're spending more time online, seeing those ads and having those interruptions become more annoying. So I'd rather invest the money to have that ad-free experience.
Megan's shopping habits have changed over the last year. South Africa's infection rate has subsided significantly since the second wave in January. But Marshall is still reluctant to venture out to the shops.
Well, going out shopping, I find that I've got control over what I'm doing. I can sanitize, I can make sure I'm not touching what I don't need to. But anyone else that's been in that store before me, you've got no control over what they're doing or how they're behaving. So online, it's much easier. I choose what I want, it gets delivered to my house. I've got complete control over what happens to that package.
According to local bank FNB, virtual shopping is growing among middle to high income earners. Home delivery services have also taken off.
We've seen lots of good growth in the grocery category, which historically was not a big category until big merchants started coming online. But I think a more interesting one for me is this home delivery piece. If you think about Mr. Delivery and Uber Eats, I mean, they've seen significant growth, anywhere between double-digit and triple-digit growth.
Retailers, banks, and other commercial platforms have had to fast-track innovation to keep in step with consumer demand.
It's more pronounced in the big metros, but what you're also finding is day-to-day customers are also adopting this. Customers enjoy the convenience of online shopping, and all we've tried to do is make sure that it's easy for them and then adds that additional layer of security so that even those customers that are not 100% comfortable can start using these technologies.
These online shopping trends are expected to continue well after South Africa emerges from the COVID-19 epidemic. Good news for the e-commerce sector with mass vaccinations yet to get underway. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And before we leave you tonight, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand weaker early today as caution set in while the market waited for the US Fed's latest policy decision. That, of course, will likely set the tone for global currency trading in the coming sessions. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling was stable today on the back of subdued demand for dollars from importers in the country. And that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.